Welcome, dear participants, to the second part of the first module of Research and Publication Ethics, a module that sits at the intersection of philosophy, scholarship, and the daily decisions you will make as a researcher. Today, we explore what ethics means, not as a set of rules imposed from outside, but as a framework of reasoning that you carry within you. We will move from the philosophical roots of ethics all the way to the specific obligations of a PhD scholar in a global research community. Whether your research is in education, psychology, the life sciences, Hindi literature, or Indian performing arts, ethics is not a foreign terrain. It is already present in your practice. Our task today is to make it visible, name it clearly, and sharpen it into a reliable intellectual instrument. Let me begin by showing you how this session is structured, our roadmap. A good roadmap does two things. It tells you where you're going and it reassures you that the journey has logic. Here is ours. Notice that the sections are not independent compartments, each builds on the one before. By the time we reach ethics in research, the philosophical architecture we have built in the earlier sections will make the practical guidance make deeper sense. Theory and practice are not opposite in ethics. They are partners. Let us begin at the very beginning, the word itself. Where does ethics come from? And what does that origin tell us? Every important word carries a history inside it. The word ethics is no exception. If we know where it comes from, we immediately understand something essential about what it does. Ethics derives from the Greek word ethos, meaning custom or characteristic behavior. The philosopher Aristotle used this root to construct his Ethicae Theoria, the systematic study of human behavior and the criteria by which we evaluate it. Around the same time in Rome, the parallel concept of mos and moris, Latin for custom, gave us the word morals. What is striking is that both roots mean the same thing, custom or habitual behavior. Yet the two words have drifted into different emphasis in philosophical usage. Ethics towards theory and principle, morals toward personal practice. Consider how this idea of custom operates in Indian performing arts. In Bharatanatyam, the concept of dharma, proper conduct, is inseparable from the idea of habitual cultivated practice. A dancer's abhinay does not spring from a rule book, but from years of embodied repetition until it becomes second nature. This is remarkably close to Aristotle's understanding of ethics. Not a code you consult, but a character you become. In education, too, we speak of school culture, the ethos of an institution, which shapes behavior more powerfully than any written policy. it's time to reflect on this aspect of ethics. Have you ever wondered why we call someone moral when we speak of their personal conduct, but ethical when we speak of their professional standards? Is that a meaningful distinction, or just a habit of language? Please think. This etymological clarity leads us naturally to a conceptual question. Are ethics and morals the same thing? The next slide draws that distinction carefully. In everyday conversation, we use ethical and moral almost interchangeably. A person of good ethics is a moral person, but philosophy insists on a distinction that is genuinely useful, especially for researchers. Ethics is the theory, the framework of principles governing right and wrong conduct. Morals are the practice, the way those principles are enacted in specific situations. Ethics is concerned with the values one seeks to express. Morals describe how one actually goes about achieving them. Think of ethics as the musical rag, the framework of rules, scale, and aesthetic intent. Morals are the actual performance, how a specific vocalist renders that rag on a given evening. The rag is the theory, the performance is the moral act. In law, this distinction has direct consequences. The Indian Penal Code and the Advocates Act represent the ethical framework, the formal codification of right conduct for legal professionals. But how an individual lawyer chooses to advise a client, what tone they adopt, how much compassion they bring, that is the moral layer. A lawyer can be technically ethical while being deeply immoral in manner. Similarly, in commerce, a company can comply fully with SEBI regulations while pursuing a business strategy that most people would judge morally reprehensible. Ethics sets the floor. Morals define the quality of what you build above it. Let's pause for a reflection. Can you think of an institution that is formally ethical, following every rule, yet behaves in a way that most people would call morally wrong? What does that gap tell us about the limits of rule-based ethics? Please ponder upon. Within moral actions themselves, there are important subcategories. Not all actions belong to the moral sphere at all. Let us look at the classification now. Here is a question to orient us. If a tornado destroys a village, is the tornado evil? If a judge wrongly convicts an innocent person, is the judge immoral? If a student copies from a classmate, is that unethical? All three feel different, and that difference is philosophically important. Moral actions are voluntary, deliberate acts aimed at the good. They involve choice, resolution, and personal responsibility. Immoral actions are the deliberate violation of a known moral rule. Amoral or non-moral actions fall entirely outside the moral sphere. They are events without intention. The tornado is amoral. The wrong conviction may be immoral. The plagiarism is definitely immoral. Ethics is concerned with immoral actions, not amoral ones. In physics, a radioactive substance decaying and emitting radiation is amoral. It follows natural law. But a scientist who knowingly mislabels a radioactive sample in a laboratory storage area, causing a colleague's exposure, that is immoral. The substance is amoral, the scientist's decision is not. In psychology, a patient experiencing a psychotic episode who lashes out does so without moral capacity. Their act is amoral, not immoral. The psychiatrist who withholds their diagnosis to avoid difficult conversations with the patient's family, however, is acting immorally. The act is voluntary, deliberate, and in violation of a known professional standard. The distinction between amoral and immoral has direct legal consequences too. In criminal law, mens rea, that is criminal intent, is precisely what separates the two. Let us ponder. We are increasingly confronted by artificial intelligence making decisions. If an AI system denies a loan application due to biased training data, is that an immoral act? By whom? The algorithm? The programmer? The organization? Does AI change the structure of moral responsibility? It would be very interesting to ponder upon these questions. These distinctions did not emerge in isolation. They evolved through centuries of historical engagement with changing moral challenges. Let us see how. Ethics has never been a settled discipline. Every century produces a new moral crisis and new philosophical tools to respond to it. The history of ethics is, in a very real sense, the history of human self-examination. Aristotle's Ethicae Theoria in ancient Greece established the field. The French and Russian revolutions shook the traditional religion-anchored value systems of their societies. In the 1950s and 60s, the ethical debates of physics, culminating in the Manhattan Project, forced scientists to ask whether discovery itself could be immoral. In 1970s and 80s, brought environmental ethics to the fore. Today, bioethics, AI ethics, digital privacy, and public health ethics dominate the conversation. COVID-19 made this viscerally real for the entire world. Indian performing arts offer a parallel ethical history. The Natya Shastra of Bharat Muni, composed roughly between 200 BCE and 200 CE, is not just an aesthetic treatise. It is an ethical one. It prescribes conduct for performers, for audiences, for patrons. It addresses questions of intent, of representation, of power. The Guru Shishya Parampara, the lineage based transmission of knowledge in traditions such as Kathak, Bharatanatyam, Kuchipudi, Satriya, Manipuri, is an evolving ethical system. It has been challenged and renegotiated in the contemporary context of commercialization, social media, and the democratization of access to knowledge. What was once an oral ethical code is now being written, and that writing is itself an ethical act. Let us ponder once again. Think about your own discipline. What was the major ethical crisis it faced in the last 50 years? How did your field respond? And what new crisis is forming right now? With this historical sweep as our foundation, let us now sharpen the definition of ethics itself, looking at it from four distinct philosophical angles. One of the signs of a genuinely rich concept is that it resists reduction to a single definition. Ethics is precisely what kind of concept? Let us examine it from four angles, each valid, each illuminating a different facet. As moral inquiry, ethics is a systematic study of human actions from the point of view of their rightfulness or wrongfulness. As normative philosophy, it is the reflective study of what is good and bad in human conduct, concerned with justice, fairness, and the justification of social norms. As a philosophical discipline, it studies the values and guidelines by which we live, using reason rather than mere tradition. As moral philosophy, it is the explicit reflection on first order moral beliefs and practices, moving beyond habit into justification. In Hindi literature, Premchand's novel Godan is a masterwork of moral inquiry and normative philosophy simultaneously. The novel asks, what do we owe the poor? What obligations bind the zamindar to the tenant farmer? It does not preach, it dramatizes. But every scene is structured by the ethical question. In sociology, Emil Durkheim's concept of moral facts as social facts situates ethics as a philosophical discipline. Values are not individual preferences but collective structures. In management, ethical leadership theory uses all four dimensions. It inquires into leader behavior, that is moral inquiry, sets standards, that is normative, studies values as cultural structures, that is philosophical discipline, and reflects on practice, that is moral philosophy. Let us ponder once again, which of these four definitions feels most at home in your research domain? And which one feels most foreign, most in need of integration? Please give a thought with respect to your research domain. Let us now ask a harder question. Is ethics a science? And if so, what kind? Most people instinctively resist calling ethics a science. Science, they feel, deals in facts. Ethics deals in values. But this instinct, while understandable, is philosophically imprecise. Let us be more careful. Sense. It is a body of reasoned truths organized in logical order with specific objects of inquiry and principles derived through reason. It is a rational science. Its conclusions follow from premises via valid reasoning. It is also a normative or regulative science. It does not merely describe what is, but prescribes what ought to be. And it is both theoretical, providing foundations for moral judgment, and practical, concerned with achieving good ends through appropriate means. Let us take some examples. Chemistry offers a useful analogy. Theoretical chemistry, quantum mechanics, atomic structure, provides the foundational principles. Synthetic chemistry applies those principles in the laboratory to produce compounds. Ethics works identically. Theoretical ethics, example, meta-ethics, normative theory, provides the intellectual foundation. Applied ethics, bioethics, publication ethics, does the synthesis in the laboratory of real decisions. In management, corporate governance theory is the theoretical science. The specific decision of whether to disclose a supplier's labor violations in an annual report is the practical science. The distinction also matters in education. Curriculum theory, normative and theoretical in nature, versus classroom ethics, which is practical and applied. In this context, let us reflect. If ethics is a science, what is its experiment? What would falsification of an ethical theory look like? Is it the same as moral failure in practice? This is a genuine philosophical puzzle. Sit with it. We have seen ethics as an abstract discipline, but it lives in daily life and in every profession. Let us ground it there now. Ethics is not an event that happens in philosophy seminars. It is woven into the texture of every interaction, every decision, every relationship, every moment of trust or betrayal. In daily life, moral elements are mixed into everything we do. We rarely experience a pure moral moment. We navigate a constellation of concerns, one of which is always ethical. We judge people on moral consistency, not on individual acts. And moral infractions are dramatic precisely because they break shared expectations of trust. Expectations we carry automatically without thinking. In professional lives, codes of ethics narrow the general ethical framework down to specific circumstances. A doctor cannot have a romantic relationship with a patient. An auditor cannot trade on undisclosed information. These are not separate moralities. They are applications of the same underlying framework to specialized contexts. In Kathak, one of the most sophisticated ethical codes in Indian performing arts governs the guru-shishya relationship. A disciple does not perform the guru's personal compositions without explicit permission. Even years after the guru's death, this is not a written rule in most gharanas. It is absorbed through immersion. I, being a dancer myself, have the first-hand experience of this particular scenario. In law, attorney-client privilege is the professional application of the general ethical principle of confidentiality and trust. In education, a teacher who shares a student's emotional struggles in a staff meeting without consent is violating the same principle that governs medical confidentiality. The principle just wears different institutional clothing. Hence, dear participants, let's reflect. Here is a caution worth naming: a narrow view of ethics, treating it as a set of external rules to be mechanically followed, is itself an ethical failure. Moral responsibility goes deeper than compliance. Have you encountered situations where someone was technically compliant but ethically hollow? I'm sure you would be able to associate this with some experience of yours in your daily life. We now move into section 2, which asks, what is the nature of ethics as a discipline and how far does its scope extend? We have established what ethics is. Now let us ask what kind of thing it is and how much of human life it reaches into. If someone asks you, what kind of science is ethics? What do you say? This slide gives you the answer and the reasons behind it. Ethics is a normative science. It applies reason to judge actions as right or wrong and directs human conduct toward what ought to be. It is a science of character. Goodness, in the ethical sense, is not an external product. It is an intrinsic quality of the person who acts. Ethics is not a practical science in the technical sense. It does not give you a procedure or algorithm. It guides you toward ideals. And ethics is not merely an art. Art produces objects through acquired skill. Ethics aims at a different kind of excellence, moral virtue, which is an end in itself, not a means. Let us take few examples. In tabla, playing the distinction between the practical science and ethics is beautifully illustrated. The technique, bowls, thekas, tal structures is the practical science. It can be drilled, measured, and tested. But the ethics of how a tabla player accompanies a vocalist, subordinating oneself, creating space, never overshadowing, is normative. It is the science of the musician's character in performance. It cannot be reduced to a rule. It must be cultivated over years of conscious attention. In psychology, this resonates with the distinction between cognitive skills, that is the trainable techniques, and moral character, that is developed through reflective practice. Carol Gilligan's Ethics of Care is precisely a science of character. It argues that moral reasoning is rooted in relationships and responsiveness, not just principles. Let us now ponder upon few questions. Can character be taught? Or can it only be cultivated through lived experience? This is one of the oldest questions in ethics. Aristotle thought the answer was cultivated through habitual practice, not passive instruction. If this is the nature of ethics, how wide is its scope? What does it actually concern itself with? Here is the scope question. Does ethics govern only your personal choices, or the rules of your profession, or the foundations of society? The answer, as you might expect, is all three. At the individual level, ethics help frame a personal code, the principles of life. At the societal level, it makes us conscious of duties toward others and functions as a guidebook of shared norms. At the philosophical level, it systematically defends and justifies those norms using both inductive reasoning from particular cases to general principles and deductive reasoning from first principles to specific obligations. The central questions that define the scope are ancient and still live. What obligation is common to all? What is good in all good acts? What are the duties of the individual to society? Few examples would illustrate this. In sociology, the scope of ethics is shaped by the tension Emil Durkheim identified between individual conscience and collective conscience. He argued that morality is fundamentally social, that individual conscience is largely internalized social values. This makes the scope of ethics reach all the way into how we study, structure, and reproduce society. In Odissi dance, the scope of ethics runs from the individual artist's inner discipline called sadhana through their responsibility to their gharana or tradition, all the way to the community of practitioners and the audiences they serve. The ethical question around the Devdasi tradition in classical dance, Odissi, its historical origins, its colonial disruption, and its contemporary reclamation spans all three levels: individual, societal, and philosophical. Similar is the case with Bharatanatyam. Let us ponder once again, where do individual morality and social morality most visibly conflict in your research field? Is there a practice that is individually ethical but socially contested, or vice versa? Philosophers have organized this scope into three formal branches of ethical inquiry. Let us map them now. Think of ethical philosophy as a building with three floors. The foundation is metaethics, the structure is normative ethics, the lived space where people actually work, argue, and decide is applied ethics. You need all three for the building to stand. Metaethics investigates where our ethical principles come from and what they mean. It asks foundational questions like, is ethical knowledge possible at all? Normative ethics investigates the standards for right and wrong conduct. It is prescriptive. What ought we to do? Applied ethics uses the tools of the first two to examine specific controversial questions: abortion, euthanasia, animal rights, publication ethics. The lines blur, and that blurring is philosophically fertile, not problematic. A few examples would illustrate this. In the life sciences, the three branches are all active simultaneously. Metaethics asks, do non-human organisms have intrinsic moral worth or only instrumental value to humans? Very interesting question, which has been puzzling me when I was a student, since I was a student. Normative ethics answers the three R's framework: replace, reduce, refine. Provides the prescriptive standard for animal experimentation. Applied ethics operationalizes this through IAEC and IACUC committees that review specific research protocols. In Indian theatre and drama, the same structure appears. Metaethics: what is the purpose of performance? Is it entertainment, spiritual practice, social critique? Normative: what standards should govern the representation of marginalized communities on stage? Applied: can this specific play featuring caste discrimination be performed in a rural Rajasthan community without triggering harm? In your own research, which branch of ethics are you most directly engaging? Please ponder. Most researchers focus on applied ethics, but without meta-ethical clarity, applied decisions often become inconsistent. Let us go deeper into each branch, starting with the one that asks more fundamental questions, that is meta-ethics. Here is a question to sit with for a moment. When you say plagiarism is wrong, are you stating a fact about the world, or are you expressing how you feel about it? Are you describing something objective, or are you making an emotional declaration? This is the meta-ethical question. What is the status of moral claims? Cognitivism holds that when we talk about right and wrong, we are talking about matters of fact. Facts that can be true or false and in principle known. Non-cognitivism holds the opposite. Moral claims are neither true nor false. They function as expressions of emotion, emotivism, as imperatives, or as expressions of pro-attitudes and con-attitudes. The debate is not merely academic. It determines whether ethical disagreements can be resolved by reason, or whether they are ultimately expressions of irreconcilable values. Let us take few examples. In physics, the question, was the use of atomic bomb on Hiroshima wrong, is a meta-ethical question of enormous consequence. A cognitivist says there is a fact of the matter, that a proper analysis of consequences, rights, and duties yields a determinate answer. A non-cognitivist says what is happening when physicists and ethicists argue about Hiroshima is that they are expressing divergent values, not discovering the shared truth. Robert Oppenheimer's famous remark, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds," is itself a meta-ethical expression of emotivist horror. In Hindi literature, when the protagonist of a Nirala poem cries out against injustice, is that a truth claim or an expression of anguish? Metaethics forces us to distinguish between the two. So let us reflect. Are more claims more like the statement, The moral claims are more like the statement, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius at sea level, a fact, or more like Malhar is the rag of the monsoon, a felt response to beauty. The answer you give will shape every ethical argument you make as a researcher. From the deepest foundational questions of metaethics, let us rise to the prescriptive level, normative ethics. If metaethics asks, what are moral claims? Normative ethics asks, what should we do? It is where philosophy becomes practical, not as a how-to manual, but as a framework for moral reasoning under pressure. Normative ethics is prescriptive. It tells us what ought to be done, not what people actually do. It is distinct from descriptive ethics, which is empirical, studying what moral beliefs people hold. The difference matters. Descriptive ethics might tell us what percentage of researchers self-report falsifying data. Normative ethics tells us why that is wrong and what the standard should be. Historically, normative theory provided single overarching principle, the greatest happiness principle in utilitarianism, the categorical imperative in Kant. By the mid 20th century, metaethics had taken center stage. Today, the boundary between the two is increasingly blurred. For example, in commerce, the descriptive and normative distinction is particularly sharp. Descriptive business ethics studies how companies actually behave. It surveys rates of bribery, accounting fraud, tax avoidance. Normative business ethics asks, what should companies do and why? The Global Reporting Initiative and ESG frameworks are attempts to operationalize normative ethics at the corporate level. In Manipuri dance, the descriptive question is, how do gurus actually treat students? What is the real texture of the teacher-student relationship? The normative question is, what should that relationship look like? Based on principles of care, respect, and faithful transmission of knowledge. Both are legitimate inquiries, but they must not be confused. Once again, time to ponder. The boundary between normative and metaethics is blurring. Is this a problem, a loss of analytical clarity, or an enrichment? Does it mean our ethical frameworks are becoming more sophisticated or more confused? Applied ethics is where normative standards meet actual decisions. Let us look at the domain that is most directly relevant to all of you as researchers. Every ethical controversy that has ever made headlines lives in applied ethics. Abortion, euthanasia, animal rights, AI regulation, caste-based discrimination, climate responsibility. These are applied ethical questions. And the answers are never simply yes or no. Applied ethics uses the conceptual tools of metaethics and normative ethics to examine specific contested issues. Its domains include bioethics, engineering ethics, business ethics, environmental ethics, publication ethics, and public policy. The questions it asks are specific. Is abortion morally permissible? Do animals have rights? Is affirmative action right or wrong? But the answers always require layered reasoning across multiple ethical frameworks simultaneously. Let us take few examples. The Mahabharata is humanity's richest single applied ethics text. Arjun's crisis on the battlefield of Kurukshetra engages virtue ethics simultaneously with deontology and consequentialism. Virtue ethics asks, what kind of person should I be? A question about character. Deontology asks, what is my duty as a warrior, as a son, as a disciple? A question about obligation. Consequentialism asks, what outcome will bring the least harm to the greatest number? A question about outcomes. Krishna's Bhagavad Gita does not choose one framework. It inhabits all three. In contemporary management, the whistleblower faces this identical trilemma. Who am I as a person? That is virtue. What does my employment contract oblige me to do? That is deontology. What will happen to the company, its workers, and the public if I speak or stay silent? That is consequentialism. So let us reflect on this aspect of ethics. Have you faced an applied ethics dilemma in your research or academic life, even a small one? What framework did you use to navigate it, even if you did not name it as such at the time? It's worth thinking about the situation. The most immediate applied ethics domain for PhD scholars is publication ethics. Let us now go into that with precision. This is section 3. From the philosophical framework, we now come directly to your desk, your data, and your manuscript. Publication ethics is where abstract principles become daily decisions. Every time you sit down to write a research paper, you are making ethical choices about what to include, how to attribute, what to claim, and how to present findings. Publication ethics makes those choices explicit and principled. The 5 core principles are accuracy, that is, data must be recorded and reported as it is without selective omission. Honesty, that is, be truthful about methods, funding sources, conflicts of interest, and limits to their findings. Non-plagiarism, all sources must be credited. Using another scholar's work without attribution is intellectual theft. Non-bias, findings must be presented objectively. Peer review integrity, reviewers and editors must act impartially, and editors bear a specific duty to detect misconduct and retract flawed work. Let me give you some instances. In the life sciences, the consequences of publication ethics violations are not abstract. In 1998, Lancet paper by Andrew Wakefield claiming a link between the MMR vaccine and autism violated every one of these principles. It was inaccurate, dishonest, and biased toward a predetermined conclusion. The paper was retracted in 2010, but its damage persists. Measles rates have risen in communities where vaccine hesitancy took root following its publication. In performing arts scholarship, the ethics of attribution is acute. A musicologist who transcribes an oral composition passed down in a village community and publishes it without crediting the source commits a form of cultural plagiarism, and not just intellectual plagiarism. In education research, Accuracy demands that we report what we found in underperforming schools as honestly as in high-performing ones. So let us ponder once again. Before you submit to a journal, do you read its publication ethics policy? Do you know the standards of the Committee on Publication Ethics, abbreviated as COPE, COPE? Make this a deliberate habit, not a formality. Within these principles, three specific violations demand particular attention. Let us name them directly. Three words should never appear in any association with your research career: plagiarism, bias, and falsification. Let us be precise about what each means, because vague warnings are not enough. Plagiarism is the failure to credit another author's work, ideas, or data when used in your publication. It is intellectual theft, morally indefensible, and scientifically harmful because it distorts the scholarly record. Publication bias occurs when a study is one-sided, when evidence that contradicts the thesis is excluded, leading to erroneous conclusions. Falsification is the most severe, fabricating data that was never collected or altering results to fit a predetermined hypothesis. Each of these has a specific editorial remedy: detection before publication and retraction after. Let us see a few examples. In chemistry, the Wang Wu Suk team cell fraud of 2004-2005 stands as a landmark case in falsification. Wang published fabricated results about human embryonic stem cells in Science magazine. 9 papers in total. Later, all retracted. The fraud consumed hundreds of millions of dollars in public funding, set back legitimate stem cell research by years, and destroyed the careers of colleagues who had trusted his data. In psychology, the replication crisis of the 2010s is largely a consequence of publication bias. Positive results were published, null results were not. The file drawer problem, where inconvenient findings are filed away rather than published, systematically distorted our understanding of human behavior. In music scholarship, unauthorized commercial recordings of a student's guru without permission, presented as the student's own interpretation, is a form of plagiarism that violates both publication ethics and the ethics of the Guru Shishya tradition. So, dear participants, please ponder on this. When your analysis produces a result that does not fit your hypothesis, what is your ethical obligation? Do you report it? Do you seek to understand it? Or do you set it aside and look for a cleaner data set? Your answer to this question defines your character as a researcher. Beyond these prohibitions, researchers also have positive ethical obligations. Let us examine what you are required to do, not just what you must avoid. So, research ethics is not only a list of things to avoid, it is an active set of responsibilities you carry toward every person your research touches: participants, communities, readers, and future scholars. 5 responsibilities define the ethical researcher. Protect anonymity. Participants have a right to confidentiality, and their identities must not appear in any publication without explicit consent. Respect autonomy. Participants must be able to make informed, meaningful choices about their involvement. Ensure justice. Decisions must be fair to all those affected, including communities that participate but may not directly benefit. Maintain consistency. Ethical decisions must cohere with the underlying theory being applied, not be adopted selectively. Record honestly. All data must be recorded as it is. Post hoc alteration, selective omission, or misrepresentation is a misconduct. Let us once again see few examples. In education research, a PhD scholar studying learning difficulties in a government school must protect the identities of those students absolutely. Publishing a case study that allows even indirect identification through school name, class, and unusual circumstance is an ethical breach with real consequences for vulnerable children. In sociology, the principle of justice has a deep dimension. If your research on tribal communities in Jharkhand produces findings, those communities have a legitimate claim to benefit, not just your university and its rankings. This is the principle of reciprocity in research. The Milgram obedience experiment in psychology is the most discussed case for all five responsibilities simultaneously. Consent was not truly informed, autonomy was manipulated, the harm was real, and the data, while honestly recorded, raised profound questions about what it is permissible to make visible about human nature. So, dear participants, in your own research design, which of these five responsibilities is most difficult to honor given your context, your community, and your methodology? Name it specifically. That difficulty is where your real ethical work begins. We have covered the principles and violations of publication ethics. Now, let us turn to section 4, which examines the cognitive and emotional mechanism by which we make ethical judgments at all. Before you can act ethically, you need to be able to judge. Section 4 examines the architecture of moral judgment itself. How do we actually arrive at a moral verdict? When a peer review committee decides that a submitted paper should be rejected for ethical violations, what has happened inside their minds? What is the mechanism of moral judgment? A moral judgment evaluates the moral quality of voluntary action, determining whether it is right or wrong in relation to a recognized moral standard. Three elements are always at work: the cognitive factor, reason, and standard. We compare a voluntary action against a moral norm through deliberate reasoning. This is the main cognitive element of moral consciousness. The emotional factor. Moral sentiments follow moral judgments. Our emotional responses of approval or disapproval arise from and reinforce our judgments. The cognitive factor. Moral obligation. The sense of oughtness, a self-imposed pulse toward what is right. Few examples would make this concept clear. In psychology, Kohlberg's theory of moral development is precisely a theory of cognitive factor. His 6 stages chart the progression of moral reasoning from fear of punishment to universal ethical principles. His critic, Carol Gilligan, adds the emotional relational dimension, care, connection, and context as equally foundational to moral judgment. In Kathakali, a classical dance from Kerala, the great classical dance drama of Kerala, the performer's task is to embody moral judgment itself. The navrasas, the 9 aesthetic emotions, are the emotional factor in moral experience. When the Kathakali artist depicts Duryodhan's pride or Draupadi's outrage, they are presenting the emotional dimension of moral consciousness for the audience to witness and internalize. The Ras experience, as Abhinav Gupta theorized it, is itself a form of moral judgment made aesthetic. Dear participants, let us ponder. Do you think emotion precedes moral judgment, or does judgment precede emotion? Jonathan Haidt argues that most moral judgments are made emotionally in a split second, and reason is deployed retrospectively to justify them. Does your experience as a researcher support or challenge this? Please think. To understand moral judgment more precisely, let us now break it into its 4 structural components. Every moral judgment, from a court verdict to a referee's decision in a peer review, has the same 4-part structure. Once you see it, you will recognize it everywhere. A subject, the person or an agent whose action is being judged. An object, the specific voluntary and habitual act that is under evaluation. A standard, the moral norm or ideal against which the act is measured. If the act conforms to the standard, the judgment is right. If it conflicts, the judgment is wrong. And a power of judging, that is the rational capacity to compare act against standard and arrive at a verdict. These 4 components are always present, whether in a formal judicial proceeding or an informal interpersonal evaluation. Let us take few examples. In law, the 4 elements are codified into the very structure of criminal proceedings. The accused, that is the subject, the offense, that is the object, the relevant provision of the Indian Penal Code or the relevant statute, that is the standard, and the judge equipped with legal training and reasoned authority, that is power of judging. Remove any one element and the judgment becomes invalid. In Hindustani instrumental music, specifically sitar, when a senior musician evaluates a student's performance, all 4 are present. The student, subject, the rag, rendition, that is the object, the traditions, grammar, and aesthetic conventions, that is the standard, and the guru's accumulated experience and discernment, that is power of judging. What makes the guru's judgment carry weight is not authority alone, but the quality of that discernment. The power of judging is itself ethically significant. So, dear participants, think about the peer review process for a journal in your field. Can you identify all 4 elements of moral judgment in operation? Is the standard, that is the peer review criteria, always explicit? And is the power of judging, that is the reviewer's expertise, always adequate to the task? These are not rhetorical questions. Having understood the structure, let us now look at the essential character of moral judgment, its 3 defining properties. Three things are always true about moral judgment. It is active, it is social, and it is obligatory. These are not features. They are the defining properties. Remove any one of them, and what you have is not a moral judgment. Moral judgment is active in nature. It is given on voluntary, deliberate acts, not on passive or involuntary experience. A reflex is not a moral act. A decision is. Moral judgment is social in character. Man is a social being, and rights and duties arise from relationships with others. A moral judgment made in complete isolation from social context is philosophically inconceivable. It always implicates others. Moral judgment is obligatory. When we judge an act as right, we simultaneously feel a duty to do it. When we judge it as wrong, we feel a duty to refrain. Critically, this obligation is self-imposed. It is the voice of conscience, not external coercion. A few examples would illustrate this. In physics, a natural event, a tornado, a supernova, is not judged morally. It is active in the physical sense, but not in the voluntary sense. A nuclear power plant engineer who ignores a safety warning because it would delay a shift handover is judged. The act is voluntary. The social consequences are massive, and the professional duty is self-imposed through training and oath. In Satriya dance tradition of Assam, founded by the Vaishnav saint Srimant Shankar Dev in the 15th century, the ethical obligations of the performer are simultaneously active. Every gesture is deliberate and meaningful. Social, the performance is always an offering to the divine and the community. And obligatory, the bhavna, the devotion, the feeling, is a self-imposed moral obligation, not a contractual one. The dancer's conscience is their primary ethical authority. So, dear participants, have you encountered cases in your field where someone evaded moral responsibility by claiming passivity? I was just following the protocol. I only processed the data. I just reported what I was told. What does the property of active moral judgment say about that? We now move into our final section, section 5, which brings all of this directly into the practice of research. Ethics in research is not a declaration you make at the start. It is a posture you maintain throughout, from the first question to the final paragraph. Let me ask you directly, when do you think your ethical obligations begin in a research project? When you collect data? When you write? When you submit? The answer is they begin when you choose the question, and they do not end when you publish. Ethics is contextual. It is shaped by local regulation, the specific community being studied, and the cultural setting of the research. It is relational. It prioritizes relationships, interconnectedness, and accountability over bureaucratic procedures. It is inclusive. Communities must be able to participate in global research, including those in complex, low-income, or fragile settings. And it is iterative. Complex research deviates from initial plans. Ethics approval cannot be treated as a one-time gate. It must be revisited as the research evolves. The 6 stages of the research journey, from idea and design through to legacy and impact, are all ethically loaded. A few examples. In sociology, ethnographic research among marginalized communities demands all 4 properties simultaneously. The researcher's ethical obligation to a Dalit community in rural Gujarat does not end with data collection. It extends to how the findings are written, published, and used by whom. In the life sciences, a clinical trial ethics board does not dissolve after first patient consent form is signed. It monitors the entire trial, responds to adverse events, and reviews protocol changes in real time. In performing arts research, when a scholar studies a dying classical form, say Satriya or Kuchipudi from a specific regional sub-tradition, the ethical question of the researcher's legacy is urgent. Who will have the access to the documentation? Will the community of practitioners benefit? Who owns the intellectual property? Dear participants, at which stage of your research journey do you feel most ethically exposed? Most researchers say data collection, but actually the stage of dissemination and legacy carries the greatest ethical weight and receives the least attention. What does an ethical solution actually looks like in practice? Let us make this concrete. This slide introduces ethical research as a journey structured through the 4 Ps. Rather than a checklist, ethics in research operates as an interconnected system: purpose, process, people, and product. Across disciplines, whether in education, physics, or performing arts, research decisions are shaped by these dimensions. This invites us to reflect: do we treat ethics as compliance or as a continuous intellectual responsibility? To understand this journey, we begin with the first dimension, purpose. The slide focuses on purpose, the ethical foundation of research. Purpose is aligned with values. In education, a study on inclusive pedagogy must aim at genuine learner development, not mere publication. In Hindustani vocal music, documenting a rare rag tradition contributes to cultural preservation rather than academic accumulation. Purpose must remain free from bias, manipulation, or external pressure. We must ask, is our research question emerging from curiosity and responsibility or convenience? From intention, we now move to how knowledge is constructed, that is, the process. This slide introduces process as the ethical execution of research. Process reflects epistemology, how we generate knowledge. In chemistry, reproducibility and accurate measurement are essential. In sociology, reflexivity ensures that researcher bias is acknowledged. In Kathak research, documenting compositions requires fidelity to the Guru Shishya tradition and proper attribution. A key question arises: are our methods chosen for rigor or for convenience? Yet, research is never isolated. It always involves people. So, this slide highlights people as the ethical core of research relationships. In psychology, informed consent is critical, especially with vulnerable groups. In law, confidentiality protects identities. In performing arts, when studying traditions like Satriya or Manipuri, cultural sensitivity and respect for practitioners become essential ethical obligations. We must reflect: do our research practices empower participants or unintentionally exploit them? The way we engage with people ultimately shapes what we produce, that is, the product. This slide focuses on product, the ethical outcome of research. In physics, reporting null results is as important as successful outcomes. In commerce, misrepresentation of financial data can have serious consequences. In Hindi literature research, selective interpretation of texts may distort meaning. Ethical products require honesty, transparency, and proper attribution. We must ask, are we presenting the truth or shaping results to fit expectations? These four dimensions are not isolated, they are philosophically interconnected. This slide connects the four P's with branches of philosophy. Purpose aligns with axiology, that is the values. Process with epistemology, that is knowledge construction. People with ethics, that is moral responsibility. Product with logic and validity, that is truth claims. For example, in life sciences, ethical trials combine all four: value-driven inquiry, rigorous method, participant protection, and valid outcomes. Dear participants, this suggests that research is not merely technical, it is deeply philosophical. We now move from concepts of practice to the research journey milestones. This slide presents the first phase of the ethical research journey, from self-reflection to participant selection. These early milestones are primarily anchored in purpose and people, with process emerging alongside. Early decisions shape ethical strength. If the foundation is weak, it cannot be corrected later. We now move to the later milestones where ethical responsibility becomes even more visible in practice. This slide covers the later phase of the research journey, from informed consent to dissemination. We must reflect, dear participants, does our responsibility end with analysis and publication, or extend beyond it to how knowledge is used? These stages together form a continuous ethical cycle to be sustained across the entire research life cycle. This slide synthesizes the ethical research journey. Each milestone reflects the interplay of the four P's, sustained through continuous alignment. Ethics is not a stage, but a constant thread, shaping every decision. Across disciplines, ethical integrity ensures meaningful knowledge. Its absence can affect justice, lives, or cultural heritage. The four P's are interconnected and cyclical, not sequential. Dear participants, as researchers and educators, our work must serve both knowledge and integrity. The depth of research depends on reflective practice, and ethics is sustained through continuous responsibility. With this understanding, we now move to examine the defining characteristics of ethical solutions in research practice. An ethical solution is not a legal loophole. It does not merely comply, it aspires. It is not the minimum required, it is the best achievable, and it takes the long road when short roads lead somewhere morally compromised. 9 characteristics define ethical solutions in research. Ethical solutions in research are guided by shared humanitarian values and promote social equity and sustainability. They consider the entire research journey, align with key principles and regulations, and are strengthened innovation. They remain sensitive to power dynamics and are supported by accountability. Often they require patience, and creative solutions are frequently ethical ones. For example, in management, the Tata Group's response to the 2008 Mumbai terrorist attacks, maintaining full pay for all contract workers at the Taj Hotel during the recovery period, despite no legal obligation, is an example of an ethical solution that took the long road. It was built on values, not regulation. In education research, an inclusive ethical approach means designing research instruments that a first generation rural learner can understand and participate in, not just a tool calibrated to urban elite respondents. Which of these 9 characteristics is most routinely absent from research in your field? Dear participants, please ponder upon this question. Name it specifically. That gap is your field's ethical frontier. Equally important is understanding what ethical research is not. 4 common misconceptions that we need to name and refuse. I want to name 4 things that are widely mistaken for research ethics, because treating them as ethics itself is a form of ethical failure. Ethics in research is not a rigid procedure or a one-time requirement. It is a continuous commitment requiring sound moral judgment. It must remain independent of funding pressures or political convenience, and it cannot be imposed on communities. Ethical research is conducted with people, not on them. I think that is a great transformation in the language that we use and practice. In psychology, ethics reviews can become bureaucratic compliance rather than genuine deliberation. In Indian performing arts research, methodological frameworks of Western ethnomusicologists, which are external frameworks, have sometimes been imposed without community consultation. In chemistry, cases like the Vioxx scandal show how funding can influence publication, violating the independence of ethical research. Dear participants, have you ever been tempted to treat ethics as a checkbox, to fill the form and then get on with the real research? What would genuine ethical engagement have required at that moment? And what would it have cost you? If you have conducted research earlier or so far, please ponder upon this. We are nearly at the end of our journey. Let me share 5 final remarks before we synthesize everything together. 5 things to carry with you when you leave this session and sit down to your research tomorrow. Research impacts lives, so it must be both compassionate and accountable. Ethical challenges are often complex and benefit from collaboration. There may be multiple solutions. The goal is to choose the most ethical one available. Ethics must remain flexible and responsive. And creativity often plays a key role in ethical innovation. I would like to give an example. The Mahabharata returns to us here at the end. Yudhishthir's famous lie to Dronacharya, Ashwatthama hath Narova Kunjarova. Ashwatthama is dead, whether man or elephant, is perhaps the most ethically discussed moment in Indian philosophy. It was a lie told to end war, spoken by the most righteous man alive on the instruction of Krishna. Was it ethical? It is the third characteristic in action, the most ethical imperfect option available in that moment. In contemporary physics, Oppenheimer's retrospective anguish about the atomic bomb illustrates the first characteristic. Research impacts are not always visible at the moment of decision. The legacy of a scientific choice can span generations. In Hindustani music, Pandit Ravi Shankar's decision to adapt the concert rag format for global audiences shortening performances, adjusting tuning for Western concert halls, was creatively and ethically motivated. It kept the tradition alive without betraying its soul. So, dear participants, please ponder, please think. What is the most ethically uncertain decision you anticipate facing in your PhD research? Name it. Have you mapped its stakeholders, its possible harms, and its ethical framework? If not, begin now. Let us close with a synthesis of everything we have covered today. We begin with the Greek word ethos, meaning custom. We end with the recognition that custom, when illuminated by reason, become ethics. And ethics, when practiced consistently, becomes character. That is the arc of this entire lecture. Ethics, as a normative branch of philosophy, addresses right and wrong, justice and social welfare. It includes meta-ethics, normative ethics, and applied ethics, with publication ethics as a key area for researchers. Unlike natural sciences, it focuses on human values and societal well-being. Ethical understanding is expressed through moral judgment, and in research, ethics is a continuous, relational, and accountable process from idea to impact. Truth unites. That final line in your slide is not a platitude. It is a philosophical claim. In every tradition we have touched today, Premchand's social realism, the Natya Shastra's aesthetic ethics, the Milgram experiment's dark revelation, the Wang fraud's catastrophic dishonesty, the ethical imperative is identical. Be truthful, be accountable, be responsive to the world your research affects. Philosophy and ethics are the tools through which that truthfulness becomes systematic, principled, and transmissible across generations. Dear participants, take 1 minute after this session, before you open your phone, before you speak to anyone, and write down one ethical commitment you will make to your PhD research. Not a rule, a commitment. Thank you for your attention and for the seriousness with which you engage this material. Ethics in research is not a constraint on your freedom as a scholar. It is the condition of possibility for your scholarship to have genuine meaning. I welcome your questions. Good luck with your research. Thank you.